Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi friends, so welcome to this week's class. So in this week, we are going to talk about some very interesting things. More importantly, we will be talking about the affect elicitation, that is the process through which the emotions are induced among the human subjects. Of course, we would like to restrict ourselves to the human subjects for the sake of this course. And more importantly, while doing so, in order to ensure that it is all being done in an ethical fashion, we will be reviewing the experimental methodology as well, including the role of the institutional review board. And finally, we will end the lecture with the discussion of the research and development tools which are in the various categories, including the data annotation, machine learning, and so on and so forth. And so this is basically to enable even the learners from the non-machine learning domains as well to be able to work in affective computing with the same efficiency. And as part of this discussion only, we will be doing a tutorial as well, which is going to do a demonstration of the PsychoPy tool. So let us just quickly dive in the affect elicitation. So the affect elicitation, we have to understand that we need to be able to reliably and ethically induce the emotions among the human subjects in order to understand and develop the emotionally intelligent machines. And there are different ways in which the emotions can be induced, and similarly there are different ways in which the emotions can be collected. The induced or the elicited emotions can be collected from the human experts. So in this particular module, we will be discussing that what are the different ways in which the affect elicitation can be done, what are the different stimulus that are there for us, and what are the different ways in which those different stimulus they vary in terms of the advantages and their disadvantages. And for certain type of experiments, you may want to use one stimulus over the other, right? So let us just quickly dive in the affect elicitation. So when it comes to the affect elicitation, let us first try to look at the different categories of the datasets which are available for the emotional expressions. So all the datasets as of now which are available for the emotional expressions can quickly categorized into three different categories. So one category is known as the acted or the posed expressions. Now acted or the posed expressions, as the name itself suggests, what it means that in this particular type of category, the actors, which could be the common individuals or often the professionally trained actors, can be asked to portray a particular type of emotion, and then that particular type of emotion is captured, let's say in using the camera sensors, or let's say using the audio modalities. So whatever the modalities that you are interested in getting the data captured. So now in this, it's quite easy actually to collect, because you can say, so for example, you can ask any individual make a pose of a smile, and the individual starts smiling. So for example, right now I am a bit smiling, right? And now you are collecting the data when I am smiling. So that is what is the acted emotion. And so it's quite easy to collect. Of course, if you have a professionally trained artist, then it makes the life much easier, because professionally trained artist which would be better able to mimic the expressions that you want them to mimic, right? So they can become happy, they can become sad, they can become angry, and so on and so forth. So this is quite easy to collect. So I think that is very easy to understand. But now, as you can see about the second point, the ecological validity of the emotions collected in this fashion is of concern. Why this is of concern? Because we all know that, for example, if you are asking an individual, or if you are asking a professionally trained artist to smile or to laugh even, or to express happiness, the individual is just expressing the happiness or mimicking the happiness, but individual may or may not be happy. within, right? So the actual state of the happiness that the individual is, actual state of the emotion that the individual has may or may not be getting reflected through the emotions that are getting portrayed on the surface, right? And for the same reason, the ecological validity of the data is a big concern here. So while maybe you are capturing the, let's say, the facial expressions could be okay, but let's say if you decide to capture or analyze or understand the brain signals at the same time, the electroencephalography signals, for example, the EEG signals at the same time, that may not give you a very good result, because the actual emotional state of the individual may or may not be the same as what the individual is representing. So I hope that this is a bit clear. And for the same reason, while this type of data sets which are using the acted or the posed expressions are, while they are very easy to collect, but their ecological validity is always a bit of concern. So they lie on the one side of the spectrum. Similarly, now we have a different category of data sets as well, which is known as the naturalistic, which constitutes of the naturalistic display of the emotions. Now in the naturalistic display of the emotions, as the name itself suggests, this is completely on the other side of this spectrum. So you are not asking an individual, you are not asking an actor to mimic a particular emotion, rather you are collecting a particular emotions expression when it is being displayed in a natural setting, in a natural fashion, right? So for the same reason, the ecological validity of the data is very high, or it's very valid, because if I am smiling in a natural setting, it may very well mean that maybe I'm happy within as well, right? So all my all the modalities of my body, including my facial expressions, my smile, my audio, my physiological signals, my brain signals, they all are going to represent the same emotion that I am actually in, right? So for the same reason, the ecological validity is quite high. Now, but of course, you can very well imagine on the other side, the problem with this type of data set is that it is quite difficult to collect. Why is it so difficult to collect? Of course, now imagine that you want to have a data set of happy emotions, sad emotions, angry emotions. Now you will have to first identify the individuals and look for the individuals who are happy in their natural setting, who are happy in their who are sad in their natural setting, who are angry in their natural setting, and you will have to imagine, just take your bag of sensors and you will have to run behind them and chase them and see when they are getting happy, when they are getting sad, when they are getting angry, etc., etc., and then only you will quickly put up the sensors and you will start collecting the data, right? So of course that is an not very easy task to do, and in some cases it could be quite impossible task to do. So for the same reason, the data collection itself can be very difficult. And nevertheless, in many cases you may have seen that people they just take the camera and then they start taking the pictures when the people are happy in their natural settings, but then there are ethical concerns also that are related to it, right? You cannot just violate the privacy of an individual or of a group of individuals, and it's only polite and ethical to even ask before even collecting their data, even if they are showing some emotions in a natural settings, right? So these are the some restrictions and some disadvantages, some problems that are associated with the naturalistic display of the emotions. And for the same reason, there are very few, or I would say very limited number of data sets that may be there even which are constituting this type of emotions. Perfect. So two categories. First is the acted category, completely portrayed emotions. Second is the naturalistic category, where you have a expression of emotions which is very naturalistic. And third category, which is really lies in the middle of these two categories, which is known as the induced expressions. So basically, in the induced expressions, what is being done is that emotional responses are elicited using some stimulus. And this is sort of, as I said, is in the middle of both the type of the data sets. So on the one hand, when I say it is in the middle of this thing, when it comes to the data collection efforts, of course the data collection efforts in the induced expressions are going to be a bit higher than the let's say than the acted or the posed expressions, right? But then it is going to be definitely a bit lower. So maybe if I just look at the data collection efforts, if I look at the data collection efforts, then this is going to be a bit higher than the acted or the posed expressions, but then at the same time this is going to be lower than the naturalistic display of the emotions, right? Similarly, if you were to look at the validity or the ecological validity of the data, then with respect to the ecological validity, the ecological validity of induced expressions is going to be a bit more than the acted or the induced expressions, but at the same time the ecological validity is going to be lower now in this case than the naturalistic display of the emotions. So I hope that this is now clear that there are three categories in which the data sets of the emotional expressions are present: acted, naturalistic and induced. Acted lies on the one side of the spectrum, naturalistic lies on the other side of the spectrum, and induced is something that is in the middle of the spectrum. Perfect. So having understood what are the different categories in which the data sets are present, and now that we have understood that the third category, that is in which the expressions are induced, is lies in the middle, so we would like to focus our attention more on the induced expression category. So basically in the induced expression categories, as we just saw, that the emotional responses are elicited via some stimulus. Let us look at that what are the different ways in which the emotion elicitation can be done. So primarily the emotion elicitation can be done in two ways. First is known as the passive or the perception based emotion elicitation. In the passive or the perception based emotion elicitation, the individuals, they look at a particular stimuli, which could be an image, could be a music, could be a film clip, and these stimulus, they evoke a particular type of feeling, particular type of emotion among the individuals, and while the individuals are experiencing these emotions, their data in terms of certain modalities which have been pre-identified, such as audio, visual, physiological signals, brain signals, so on and so forth, is being collected. So that is what is known as the passive or the perception based. It is known as passive because the other than watching, other than experiencing, looking, the individual is not really doing something, right? The individual is not playing, the participant is not playing a very active role here, right? So that is what is the perception or the passive emotion elicitation. Now of course, on contrary to the passive or the perception based elicitation, we have the active or the expression based elicitation. So active or expression based elicitation, as you can rightly understood now, that this is just opposite of the passive emotion elicitation, in this what happens, that the individuals are asked to perform particular behaviors. Please pay attention here, that rather than observing a particular stimuli, rather than simply observing a particular stimuli, the individuals are now being asked to perform a particular behavior that might naturally evoke different emotions, right? So for example, as simple as that, posing facial muscles, as simple as that. So for example, if I were to put this pen in my mouth, which I am not going to do, but if I were to put this pen in my mouth, something like this, it means I am hindering my facial expressions from smiling. I am inhibiting the smile, right? I'm preventing my face to from my face to do a smiling face. Similarly, if I were to put this pen in my teeth like this, so I'm making an expression like this, so I'm forcing myself to smile, right? Something like that. Similarly, you can adopt lots of different types of body postures, or you can be interacting with the people in a particular fashion, so that a particular emotion is being elicited. And then of course, while these particular emotions are being elicited, again we can use predefined set of sensors, modalities in which we want to collect the data, and the data collection can be done, right? So then this is quite simple. First category, passive or the perception based. Second category, active or the expression based. Now if I were to ask which category of which of these two categories is easier to collect the data and which of this is a bit harder to collect the data, what do you think? Well, of course the answer would be that the passive or the perception based would be easier in comparison to the active or the expression based. Why? Because of course, more or less for the same reasons that we have seen the data sets earlier, that you are not really asking the individuals to do a lot of things, right? So individuals are just playing a passive role, and hence it is being easy, it is relatively easy to capture their data, and perhaps it gives you more control of the environment to collect the data, and hence to have a standard data set, right? Perfect. So we talked about the emotion elicitation. One is the passive based, one is the active based. Let us look at now the passive. Let us look in more detail about the what are the different ways in which we can do the passive emotion elicitation. So the very first stimulus that comes to our mind is of course the images. With respect to the images, the idea is very simple. What you do, you present a particular type of image to to certain set of individuals in order to evoke a particular type of feeling. So for example, if you want the individual to experience a happy emotion, you would be presenting some happy images, right? Images depicting happy emotions. So for example, images of a maybe of a cute baby, images of a very beautiful flower, and then things so on and so forth, right? So on and so forth. So you got the idea that the basic idea is that you are going to use image as an stimulus to provoke a particular type of emotion, and what the participants has to do, they simply have to look at the screen and they simply have to look at the image and that is being presented, and then while the image is being presented, you are going to hope that the same type of emotion is being experienced by the participant that you wanted to elicit, and accordingly you would be collecting the data in the different modalities, right? So but one thing that you have to pay attention here, not only with respect to the images but with all the stimulus, that the presentation method has to be standardized such that the individuals, all the individuals, those who are participating, they have the same viewing experience. So for example, there are different researchers, those who have given their comments on how to standardize this kind of viewing experience. But for example, if you look at this paper from Monkarashi and his group, then what they are saying that the images, for example, could be presented for 10 seconds. So how long the images should be presented? The answer is 10 seconds on a computer screen, and the computer screen should be fixed at a fixed distance. So you cannot just change the distance of the participant from the screen. There has to be a fixed chair, there has to be a fixed monitor on which the image is being presented. The image duration should be same, 10 seconds. Of course, needless to say, it has to be a constant screen resolution. You cannot just change the resolution of the screen. The screen brightness as well has to be constant. You cannot just change the screen brightness from the image to image, and the same goes for the image size as well. So image size as well has to be the constant or has to be the same. Now what particular image size, what should be the screen resolution, what should be the screen brightness, that depends on so many different things. But what is of more importance, that your participant or the individual who is acting as a participant should be able to clearly look at the image, number one, should be able to experience the emotions that are being presented in the image without having the influence of any other variables. So without having the influence of the screen brightness, resolution, image size or the distance, right? So this is a nice paper to look at, but more or less these are some of the standard conditions that you want to use, you want to maintain while collecting the data while presenting the image as an stimulus, right? Of course, now the next set of questions, which images should I present? As I said, so you want to make use of the images according to the emotions that you want to evoke. But now, are there any standard set of images? So for example, or let me ask you this question. Now, if of course I know that it's quite acceptable that if I am going to make use of an image which is of a cute baby or of a flower, maybe it is going to make the individuals happy. But is it standardized? Is it already well known? Is it already validated? It is already established? So the answer is yes. There are certain standard images datasets such as IAPS and GAPED, International Affective Picture System, and Geneva Affective Picture Database, which is already well validated datasets of images. What do you mean by well validated? That a particular set of images have been screened for you, they have been already shown to the participants, and participants have been shown to have experienced the emotions that these images wanted to provoke, these images wanted to elicit, right? So let us just take a quick example of some sample pictures from the IAPS data set. So for example, if you look at the screen, now in this you have, of course, and there are different categories of emotions that can be elicited. So for example, for the IAPS, you have awe, excitement, anger, sadness, contentment, amusement, and so on and so forth. Now, if you were to look at a particular kind of feeling, so for example, sadness, if you look at the sadness, emotion of the sadness, now by looking at this particular image, it looks kind of a very sad image actually. And when you look at these sad images, of course, uh, you may experience the sad emotion as well, right? So that is what the basic idea is. Similarly, let's say if you look at this image here, which is depicting the fear emotion. So if you look at this particular image emotion, maybe the individual is feeling scared or afraid, and the same emotion, the participant who is going to view this image may experience the same type of emotion, and similarly it goes for the same for the awe, for the contentment, and so on so forth, right? So basically this is the IAPS dataset images which you can very well go and look for the, and this is publicly available for you to download and for you to experience. Perfect. So having talked about that, images are one particular type of passive stimuli which can be used to present the stimulus. Now let us try to look at what are some of the advantages of this particular type of emotions of this particular type of stimulus. So of course, one particular advantage, it's very non-invasive. Of course, all the passive methods, they are going to be non-invasive, right? So it's not intrusive, and the individual does not have to put any effort. So it's very comfortable for the participant to look at these stimulus, which is these images. Of course, these are easily accessible in the sense, first, there is a data set of images which are widely validated already, which is already publicly available in terms of IAPS, GAPIT, and so on and so forth. So you can simply use them, and in order to present these images as an stimulus, you require a very simple setup, right? So you simply need a computer screen, you simply need to put the computer screen at a particular resolution, at a particular distance, and so on and so forth, and you simply need to put the participants in a fixed chair, and participants should be able to simply look at the screen, and then you are going to collect the data, right? So it's really very easy to collect the data set, to create a data set of the emotional expressions of by using the images as an stimuli. Now, there are certain disadvantages, of course, and I think one disadvantage that you may have observed already by looking at the images is that the strength of the emotion is lower, right? So basically, the intensity with which the participant is going to experience the emotions while looking at an image may not be as high, right? Or may not be very high. In fact, it could be quite low in many cases, right? So that is why the strength of the emotion is lower. Of course, it's quite understood. Emotional reactions are short and transient. What does it mean? It simply means that even if, let's say, like I'm going to watch an image and I'm going to feel something, that particular feeling that I'm going to have, let's say happiness or sadness or whatever, is going to be very short. I'm not going to be happy for a longer duration of time. Let's say, I just look at an image and now I'm sad for 10 minutes. That is not going to be the case. So it's going to be very short duration, maybe a couple of seconds, few seconds only maybe. And then of course, it's going to be very transient. Right? So in that sense, you will have a very short time window in which you can really capture the expression of that emotion through different modalities, right? So that is what essentially it means, and hence this is another disadvantage. Of course, the third, that there is a lack of personalization. What do you mean by there is a lack of personalization? Of course, apart from the fact that different individuals may experience different emotions by observing while looking at the same image, right? So for example, maybe you are presenting a picture of a let's say a dog, a cute puppy, right? But maybe someone's puppy recently died, maybe, and for the same reason, while looking at that particular image, while one individual may feel happy, the another individual may start feeling sad. So of course, there is a lack of personalization here. If you're thinking that the same image is going to induce the same set of emotions among different participants. Apart from this, there are different studies which have shown that the personalization can be done at the various levels. So for example, this very interesting study from the SNCU and his group pointed out that the individuals with cocaine addiction, they react differently to the pleasant, unpleasant, and the neutral IAPS images in comparison with the control population. So here you have another way in which you see that the individual's preconditions, including their addiction, including their medical history maybe, and so on and so forth, and including their biases and prejudices also can play a role in their experience of the emotion. Now, so this is just one thing, right? And then there is a reason why I put this etc. term here, because of course there are different other several other types of disadvantages that can be associated with this image as an stimuli as well, but now I would like you to think some of them. Right, perfect. So we talked about the advantages, we talked about the disadvantages of the emotions. Now the utilizing image, there is another thing that you have to understand, that when you use the images for the emotion expressions, they can be very useful actually for the reactive modalities in which there is a reaction from the human, in which there is a reaction from the body, such as your facial expressions. You are reacting by seeing an image in your physiological signals, so the same type of reactions can be expressed in your physiological modalities as well, but may not be very useful when you want to collect the productive modality. So for example, let's say if you want to analyze that, okay, you want to understand the emotions in the text. Now if you want to understand the emotions in the text and you are showing image as an stimuli, now if you're showing an image as an stimuli, it's going to be very, very hard or next to impossible to collect the textual data in which the individual is going to express his or her emotional state, right? So for example, it's not going to happen that suddenly I saw an image and maybe I will start writing that, okay, I'm feeling very happy by looking at this image, for example, right? And similarly, for example, gestures, while of course the amount of gestures that one individual makes in comparison to the other individual, it varies, but it's going to be very, very hard that just by looking at one particular image, suddenly the individual will start making gestures, right? So now you got the idea that why this type of passive method of image, of using image as an stimulus, of image as a stimulus may not be very helpful for collecting the productive modalities in the data collection, right? Perfect. So this was all about the images. Now of course the next thing that we can ask, the next question that we can ask, if we can use image as an stimulus, can we use film clips, video clips as an stimulus? The answer is yes. If we can use the video clips also as a stimulus, the basic idea is the same. We have to follow some standardization, and the idea here is more or less the same as the idea of the images, is that first what we do, that we present a neutral baseline film. A neutral baseline film means, of course, everyone's new baseline emotional state can be different. Hence, even before you start collecting the actual emotional expressions, you may want to first show a neutral film, which is not necessarily evoking any particular emotion. It's a neutral film. Maybe you are just talking about some documentary, talking about general stuff. And so you want to put the participant in a particular neutral state of emotion. And then after that, you want to maybe present one particular emotion clip related to, let's say you want to make the individual happy. Then maybe after making the individual happy or sad or whatever, then maybe you want to do some sort of self-assessment in order to ask that, okay, what exactly was the emotion, for example, that you felt while using this thing, and similarly so on and so forth. You can simply go on putting one emotional clip, one self-assessment, another emotional clip, another self-assessment, and so on and so forth. Please pay attention. Self-assessment is just one type of ground truth that you can collect from the participants, right? Of course, while the individual is watching the clip, you may want to collect and you have to keep collecting the data of the audiovisual modalities using a webcam or a camera. Similarly, if you are interested in the physiological signals, you may have attached already the sensors which are already collecting the physiological signals while the individual is watching the video clip, and so on and so forth, right? So and of course, once the emotional clip presentation is done, then the self-assessment phase is there, where you are asking the participant to provide the basic ground truth, that how exactly. So the questions can be very, very simple. So for example, I showed you an image video, and then I asked, okay, how did you feel after seeing the video? Is as simple as that, right? Now, having said that, so it's very, very simple. Of course, all the standardization conditions are more or less as we saw in the case of the images. It has to be more or less the same. Now, there are a couple of questions that you may want to answer. First, should we make use of the short clips or the long clips? Now, of course, there is a trade-off here, right? So, if you make use of a very, very short clip, then what is going to happen? This particular video clip stimulus is going to start behaving like an image. So, the emotions are going to be short, transient. The intensity of the emotions may not be as high as you want it to be. right? But then if you make use of a very long clip, then also you can say that, okay, for example, if I show you a 1 hour long video and then I ask, okay, how did you feel? Now that is a very complex answer, because over the period of 1 hour, I may have felt different emotions, and then you cannot really say that at what particular point of time I was experiencing what particular emotion, right? So then there has to be a trade-off. And as I said, so for example, usually in the research, in the literature, a clip of 1 to 2 minutes have been used fairly widely, and that is what is the trade-off that is there between the video short and the long clips. So 1 to 2 is quite good. Of course, as I said, physical situation, as we are standardizing in respect to the images, has to be standardized for the video clips as well. And so, for example, Rottenberg shows and his team shows in a paper that, for example, it could be a 20-inch monitor at approximately at 5 feet from the participant, of course with a constant screen resolution, constant duration, more or less constant duration. Of course, while there could be video clips which can be, one video clip could be of another one duration, another video clip, let's say, one video clip, let's say if you're talking about 2 video clips, so one video clip could be of, I don't know, let's say 60 seconds, another video clip could be 63 seconds. So this is perfectly fine. There is no problem in that. Perfect. So now let me just quickly rub this thing in order to make it clear. For each target emotion, the basic strategies that you may want to present, rather than just one, maybe 1 to 2 short clips. And of course, these 2 short clips should be as homogeneous as possible. What do you mean by as homogeneous as possible? More or less the duration should be the same, the intensity should be the same, the context more or less should be the same, the of the videos, the quality of the video should be more or less the same. Otherwise, it can influence this thing, right? Now, similarly, the way we have some standard images, a data set of standard images which are already pre-validated, do we have data sets of videos that are already pre-validated? Of course, no one is stopping you to curate your own data set, but of course, it's always good to look at what if there is something existing. If there is existing, you can use that. Otherwise, of course, feel free to go. So, for example, we do have, so for example, FilmStim is one such popular data set of video clips which is already there, and you can use one of the images from one of the videos from this thing to present a particular, use it as a stimulus. So, for example, let's see, I'm not sure if I can play this thing here, but okay, so you can just go ahead and look at, so for example, this is a sample video clip from this FilmStim. So this, if you recall, this is a very famous clip from the movie, I believe is from the Schindler's List. And if you recall, so what happens basically in this clip, that this particular individual, he was looking at some migrants and some workers, and I believe he shots one of the children that were there. And so I think that was very sad kind of clip. So you look at this clip and you feel a very sad emotion, you feel a bit angry as well, you feel disappointed as well. So there are lots of emotions that you experience while looking at this particular type of video clip. So as you can see, so the duration of this thing is of course between 1 to 2 minutes, which is 1 minute 38 seconds exactly, to be precise in this case. Now, having talked about the sample, now let us quickly look at sorry, let us quickly look at what are some of the advantages of the video clips over the images when we are using them as a stimulus. Of course, they capture the attention very well. It's needless to say that you'll pay more attention while looking at a video clip rather than while looking at an image. Fairly easy. If you look at the intensity of the emotions, there has been a number of research which shows that the intensity of the emotions for the video clips are bit higher and could be quite for the video clips. And at the same time, you can even make use of you can even induce complex emotional states such as let's say shame, guilt, and all those kind of emotions which otherwise would be very, very hard to induce while using the images as an stimulus, right? And of course, as I said, for the images, there was another problem that since the emotions that were being expressed were short and transient, so you could not really study let's say what is the emotional latency. So what do you mean by the latency? Emotional latency means that after having presented the stimulus, how much time it took for the individual to express or experience those emotions. So for example, maybe you presented an image, you presented a video clip, and after exactly 200 milliseconds, the individual process, it took 200 milliseconds for the individual to process it, and within 200 milliseconds the expression or the experience of that emotion started appearing in the facial expressions, in the brain signals, and so on and so forth. So that is the emotion latency. So since the emotions, they last longer, now you can study what is the latency of a particular emotion in a particular modality. What is the rise time? Of course, how much time it takes for the emotion to reach at a peak, because of course you have a longer duration emotions, so you can really analyze that, okay, how the emotions are arousing, and when they are appearing at a peak, and then when they are going down. Similarly, what was the total duration and what was the offset time between the, it's more or less similar to the latency between the presentation of an stimulus and the experience of the emotion. Right, of course, then associated with the advantages, then you also have some disadvantages. For example, ecological validity, of course, it can be in question. So maybe you want to induce a positive emotion by presenting a positive clip, but maybe the individual is feeling sad for so many reasons. Maybe there is a lack of personalization, maybe because of the prejudices, because of the bias, and so on and so forth. So the ecological validity, it may be in question. Of course, to avoid this, what we try to do, we try to make use of the data sets which are already pre-validated, such as film stim and so on, so forth. Other, of course, you have to take into account this factor that the individuals may have seen the video clips before. So for example, the Schindler's List, if the same movie, someone has already seen this movie, maybe the individual is not going to feel or experience the emotion in the same way while looking at this clip in comparison to someone who has never seen the movie or the clip, because of course they already know what is going to happen, what is about to happen. So you have to take all these factors into account. Now, of course, again here, since it's a passive modality, again it's not ideal for collecting the data from the productive modalities, such as text. Suddenly I'm not going to start writing while looking at the video clip that, okay, how I'm feeling. I'm not going to start making gestures that are accordance to the emotions that I'm feeling, right? So that is what the other thing about this video clips. So with that, now, so we talked about the images and the film clips. Now let us move to the behavioral manipulation. So now that we have already seen the image and the film clips as the stimulus, passive methods, emotion elicitation method way, now let us look at the active methods. So in the active methods, the behavioral manipulation is one very popular method in which you ask the participants, or the participants are being asked to put their themselves in a particular behavioral pattern, behavioral configuration, in order to evoke a particular type of emotion, right? And there was Ekman was one of the first researchers who did a lot of work extensively on the facial muscles in general, and trying to understand that how putting yourself in one particular type of facial configuration can also evoke a particular type of emotion or the desired emotion that you want the participant to experience. And in relation to this only, he proposed something which is known as a directed facial action task. So in the directed facial action task, what Paul Ekman proposed, that you can ask the participants to create or mimic a particular type of action unit. So by action units, what we mean by, for example, this is the directed facial action task. So for example, you can ask the participant to put himself or herself in a particular type of action unit. So for example, action unit 12 is the lip corner puller. So you can ask the participant to mimic the facial action unit 12, which is the lip corner puller, and while putting while putting the participant in this particular configuration, facial configuration, the participant will experience the emotion that is associated with this facial action unit. So for example, there are lots of research which says, Paul Ekman's group himself has given that what particular type of facial action units are associated with which type of emotion. So for example, if I were to ask here that facial action unit with this is the facial action unit is the lip corner puller, then what is the type of the emotion that you think will it be associated with it? Of course, the answer would be that could be a happy or joyful kind of a position, right? Because you are forcing your face to do mimic a smile. So this is what is the facial action task in which you can ask the participant to do the manipulation of the facial expressions through which the desired emotion can be evoked. That is one type of behavioral manipulation. Other type of behavioral manipulation, which is also again not so uncommon in the affective computing research, which is known as the recall method. So, in the recall method, you may have experienced that when you ask the participant or when you yourself try to recall the experiences of the past, then you tend to feel that particular emotion as well. So, for example, in the past, if in a moment I have felt a particular happy emotion while, let us say, visiting a particular place, then if I start recollecting the memories of that particular place, I will again start experiencing the happy emotion that is associated with it, right. So, that is the recall manipulation, recall behavioral manipulation. So, we already looked at the one example of the facial action task. So, for example, this was a work that was done by our group only, in which we showed that how can you use the directed facial action tasks to identify what are the different facial expressions can be recognized with the help of the earable device that the individual is putting in his ear while making a particular facial expression. So, for the interested readers, I would like to invite them to please go ahead and read the paper in order to know the more details how a earable device can be used to recognize the facial emotions that is associated with the facial action task. Perfect. That is one of the advantages, but then of course, there are certain disadvantages associated with the behavioral manipulation. So, for example, one disadvantage that is there is the ecological validity of the data itself can be in question here. Of course, while I am trying to mimic a smile, does it really mean that I am smiling? Does it really mean that I am happy? So, that is where is the question that can be asked, that are my emotions pure when I am trying to mimic a particular emotion? So, again, this is the same question that we had asked in the beginning as well. So, the ecological validity of course is in question. Other question that we want to ask is that in order to use the behavioral manipulation to evoke a particular emotion, we need to know the physical behavior associated with all the target emotions, right. So, for example, Paul Ekman's group, his work itself did not include several complex emotions such as frustration, confusion, engagement. So, Paul Ekman and in his work did not very clearly distinguish how when an individual is experiencing frustration or confusion or engagement for that matter, what are the different facial action units associated with it and how exactly it can be evoked and expressed in terms of the facial expressions. So, now with this, what happens that it limits the range of the target emotions that you can really induce in a participant, right. So, for example, if I really do not know that what is the gesture, what is the facial expression that is associated with the frustration, I really cannot ask the participant to make that gesture, to make that facial expression, and hence I cannot evoke that particular emotion, and in the absence of such elicitation, I cannot really understand and analyze that particular type of emotion, right. So, it really limits the range of the target emotions that the individual can be elicited with. Now, third, any guess what is the third disadvantage? Perfect. So, now the third, of course, it can be very clear that the poses or the actions, even if it is known for particular emotions, can be really hard or difficult for a participant to mimic or to put himself or herself in. So, for example, here only if you look at the directed facial action task, now I am pretty sure that, for example, in this there are certain emotions, certain facial action units that could be a bit easier in comparison to something that is a bit harder. So, for example, if you look at the brow lowerer, maybe brow lowerer, okay, even I think I can do. So, maybe brow lowerer is a bit easy. Now, similarly, if I were to look at, let's say, lip tightener, maybe, okay, I do not know if I am able to make it very clearly, right. So, but of course, now you saw the problem that whether I am able to do the lip tightening the way it is supposed to be, and then similarly there are all other different types of facial action units, and not only the facial action units, you also have to look at the gestures associated with it that you want your participants to perform, and maybe not all the participants would be very comfortable in performing those, and hence this pose or the actions can be very difficult or complicated. Of course, in comparison, maybe you can get the recall experiences can be a bit better, that you can get get the participants recall some of the experiences that they had in the past, and can hopefully it will evoke a particular desired emotion in them. And advantages, we already talked about that it's really useful in collecting the reactive expressions, such as the emotions as it is being expressed in the facial expressions or in the gestures. Now, other thing that you have to understand, that the intensity of the emotion can be really strong if we can ensure the ecological validity of it. How can we ensure the ecological validity of it? Of course, in order to do that, we really need to understand the physical behavior associated with the target emotions have to be known precisely, right. So, for example, of course, we know that when you are happy, when you are experiencing joy, then of course maybe you are smiling. When you are smiling, then of course you cannot really smile without having pulled your lips, right. So, maybe you are pulling your lips. So, this is a precise information that is available for happy and corresponding facial action units and corresponding facial muscles configuration. So, maybe you can expect here that okay, if the individual is mimicking this particular type of a smile through this body brain effect that we studied earlier, we can very well expect the individual to start feeling or experiencing this particular type of happy emotion. So, in this case, the intensity of the emotions can be a bit stronger than, for example, in comparison to the images or the images as a passive method stimulation, right. Perfect. So, that is the one that is not the only active method. Behavioral manipulation is not the only method for the active emotion elicitation. One other method which is not again very uncommon is the social interaction. So, basically social interaction, what do we mean by the social interaction? Of course, social interaction is basically when you are interacting in a society with the society in general, with the individuals, with the groups and with the community. Now, the idea is very simple, that while you are interacting with the society in general, of course, there cannot be an absence of the emotions, right. So, whenever you are interacting with the other individuals, whenever you are interacting with the groups, whenever you are interacting with the community, with your relatives, with your friends, of course, there are certain emotions that are bound to occur, that are bound to happen. So, basically this is a very naturalistic setting in which the emotions are being evoked and the emotions are being expressed, right. And hence, so one of the advantages, of course, it's that the elicited emotions are very realistic and are very natural, provided that you can really capture them, right. So, please recall that we did talk about in the beginning that capturing of the emotions in such a setting can be really difficult. So, you cannot just take out your camera and start clicking the pictures of the people, those who are, for example, happily interacting in the park, right. Of course, there are privacy concerns, and on the top of that, imagine if you want to understand their brain signals. So, are you going to really put a sensor immediately on their head when you saw them laughing in the park? That you cannot do, right. So, there is a disadvantage associated with it, that the data collection setup can be really difficult. It's not easy to collect the data, but of course, the emotions, they can be very realistic and natural. Other very interesting thing with this particular type of setting, which is a social interaction setting, is that there are certain emotions that are really hard to evoke when you are using the passive methods, such as images or even for that matter behavioral manipulation, or for that matter or video clips, or along the same lines we could have also talked about the audio, which is the music, but nevertheless I think now you got the idea that audio, images, video clips, they all fall in the same category of the passive methods of the emotion elicitation. But now there are certain emotions which are a bit complex and maybe a bit harder to induce, such as for example guilt, shame, again anger maybe to certain extent, right. These are certain emotions that are a bit complex, and you cannot really just present a particular image, present a particular video clip, maybe make them listen to some music, and you start individual to experience some guilt, some shame. So, but in the social interaction this is fairly easy. So, I think it's fairly common experience that you may have also been when your relatives, your friends, they have said something and you have immediately started feeling guilty about that. For example, you may not have been able to give them enough time, or for example maybe started feeling ashamed about certain things that you may or may not have done, but have been, it is now being talked about in the social gathering, in the social interaction, right. So, in short, we talked about the social interaction as an active emotion elicitation. We talked about the behavioral manipulation as an active method of manipulation. We talked about the video clips. We talked about the images at the passive method of emotion elicitation. And as I said, along these lines, you can very well include the music, the audio. Of course, it's not hard to understand that it falls into the passive category of the emotion elicitation. Advantages, disadvantages, I invite the interested audience to look at and explore what could be the advantages of using the music as a stimulus, using the audio as a stimulus, and what could be some of the disadvantages associated with the music as an stimulus. Perfect. So with that, then we finish this particular module of the emotion elicitation, and in the next module, now we will be talking about the experimental methodology. So with that, let's take a break. Thanks.